Some parents lose their children in one terrible argument. I lost mine in pieces, one unanswered call, one canceled dinner, one cold message at a time. By the time they finally cut me off completely, they thought they had taken away the only thing I had left. They were wrong. My name is Thomas Hale. I was 68 when my daughter sent the message that changed the shape of my family forever. Do not call us again. We need space. Please respect our decision. There was no greeting, no explanation, no dad. Just 3 sentences sitting on my phone like a locked door. I read them at the kitchen table while the coffee beside me went cold. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of the house where I had raised both of my children. The same house where Emily used to sleep on the sofa when thunderstorms scared her. The same kitchen, where Daniel once stood on a chair beside me, flour on his face, insisting he had invented pancakes. 40 years of fatherhood, reduced to a message that could have been sent to a salesman. The strange part was that I was not surprised. Hurt, yes, humiliated certainly, but not surprised. For nearly 2 years, I had watched my children slowly rewrite our history. Every sacrifice became control. Every offer of help became interference. Every question became criticism. They no longer remembered the father who worked weekends to pay their tuition. They remembered only the man who asked why Daniel had missed another mortgage payment and why Emily's husband kept borrowing money he never returned. According to them, I was difficult. According to me, I was finally paying attention. My wife Margaret had been gone 3 years by then. Cancer took her slowly, but it took the family quickly. She had been the bridge between us, the one who softened my words and translated their excuses. After she died, I kept trying to hold everyone together with Sunday dinners, birthday checks, paid vacations, and the kind of patience that looks noble from the outside but feels like fear when you are the one living it. I was terrified that if I stopped giving, they would stop coming. Then they stopped coming anyway. I called Emily after reading the message. Straight to voicemail. I called Daniel. He declined the call before the second ring. That tiny red symbol on my screen did something no insult had managed to do. It made everything clear. They did not want a father. They wanted distance from the man, while keeping access to everything the man had built. So I sat there in the rain, opened the contact list on my phone, and called the one person my children never expected me to involve. My lawyer. My lawyer? And before that week was over, every comfortable assumption they had made about my money, my house, and my will was about to collapse. I wish I could tell you I called my lawyer because I wanted revenge. That would make for a cleaner story. The truth is, I called him because I didn't know what else to do. His name was Arthur Bennett. He had handled Margaret's estate after she passed away and helped us create our wills years earlier. He knew every detail of our finances, every property we owned, every investment account, every trust, and every promise Margaret and I had made to each other about protecting our family. He answered on the second ring. Thomas, he said, it's been a while. Is everything all right? I looked around the empty kitchen before answering. No, I admitted. I don't think it is. There was a long pause. Come by the office, he said quietly. I'll clear my afternoon. His office sat in the same brick building downtown where I'd first signed incorporation papers for Hale Manufacturing nearly 35 years earlier. Walking through those doors felt strangely familiar. Like stepping back into a version of my life where problems could still be solved. Arthur greeted me with a firm handshake, then studied my face for several seconds before speaking again. You look exhausted. I am. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking whether I wanted one. That was Arthur. He never rushed people. He let silence do its work. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the canceled Sunday dinners, the birthdays they forgot, the excuses, the loans, the mortgage payments I'd quietly covered, the vacations I'd paid for because I couldn't bear another family gathering ending in an argument about money. Then I handed him my phone. He read Emily's message once. Then he read it again. When he placed the phone on his desk, he didn't immediately look at me. Instead, he folded his hands together. Thomas, he asked carefully, have your children contacted you at all this month before sending this? I thought about it. Daniel had called once, not to ask how I was doing, to ask whether I would renew the guarantee on the business line of credit I'd secured for his construction company. Emily had texted a week earlier. She wanted to know whether I planned to continue paying the private school tuition for my 2 grandchildren. Neither conversation had lasted more than 5 minutes. Neither had included the words, "How are you?" I shook my head. "Not really." Arthur nodded slowly. "I was afraid you were going to say that." He opened a thick folder from his desk drawer. I recognized my own name printed neatly across the tab. The Hale family estate. Then he said something I will never forget. "Thomas, your children believe your estate belongs to them." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "The law says otherwise." For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt the faint, unfamiliar feeling that perhaps I wasn't as powerless as my children believed, and Arthur was only beginning to explain just how wrong they were. Arthur opened the folder slowly, almost respectfully, as though he understood that every page inside represented years of my life rather than numbers on paper. "You and Margaret planned well," he said. "Better than most families ever do." I gave a tired smile. That was mostly her. She always worried about protecting everyone. "And who protected the 2 of you?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I didn't answer because I didn't have one. He slid a document across the desk. It was the original estate plan Margaret and I had signed 8 years earlier. I still remembered that afternoon. We had celebrated afterward with dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Margaret laughed because I joked that we probably wouldn't need any of the paperwork for another 30 years. Life has a cruel sense of humor. Arthur tapped the final page. "If something happened to you today, your estate would be divided equally between Emily and Daniel after several charitable gifts Margaret specifically requested." I nodded. "That's what we wanted." "Is it still?" The room fell silent. I stared at Margaret's signature beside mine. Elegant, confident, full of hope. Back then, our children still came home for Christmas because they wanted to. The grandchildren still begged to stay overnight. Family photographs weren't scheduled obligations. They were simply life. "I don't know anymore," I admitted. Arthur didn't push. Instead, he opened another file. "Over the last 7 years," he said, "I've watched you make financial decisions that weren't part of your retirement plan." He looked down at his notes. "You paid $78,000 toward Daniel's business loans." I nodded. "He promised it would be temporary." "You also paid $46,000 toward Emily's children's education." "I wanted the kids to have opportunities." "You refinanced this house once." I looked away. "To help Daniel avoid bankruptcy." Arthur continued. "You liquidated part of your investment portfolio after Margaret passed away." Emily said they were struggling. He leaned back in his chair. "Thomas, do you know how much financial assistance you've provided your children during the past decade?" "I've never added it up." "I did. He turned a yellow legal pad toward me. At the bottom was one number. $483,620. I blinked twice. It couldn't be right. I never gave them that much. "You didn't give it all at once," Arthur replied gently. "You gave it one emergency at a time. One mortgage payment. One tuition bill. One medical expense. One business loan. One family vacation. One just until next month." The numbers never looked dangerous individually. Together, they told a different story. I suddenly understood why my retirement savings felt smaller than Margaret and I had planned. It wasn't inflation. It wasn't bad investments. It was love without boundaries. Arthur closed the folder. "I've practiced estate law for 34 years, he said quietly. "And I've learned something difficult." I looked at him. "The children who appreciate help rarely expect it." He let that sentence settle between us. The children who expect help rarely appreciate it. For the first time since receiving Emily's message, I stopped wondering what I had done wrong. Instead, I began wondering what I had allowed to happen. And that question was far more dangerous than anything my children had ever said to me. I drove home with Arthur's words following me the entire way. Love without boundaries. I repeated the sentence at every red light, like I was trying to decide whether it was wisdom or an accusation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had stopped. The maple tree Margaret planted the year Emily was born scattered orange leaves across the front lawn. Every autumn she would stand on the porch with a mug of tea and complain that she had married a man who could build a factory from scratch, but somehow never managed to rake leaves before the neighbors did. I smiled despite myself. Then I walked into an empty house, and the smile disappeared just as quickly. The silence felt different now. Before, it had sounded lonely. Now it sounded honest. I made myself dinner that night. Nothing fancy. Just grilled chicken and vegetables. Margaret used to tease me because I always cooked enough for 4 people, even after the children moved away. Out of habit, I reached for 4 plates. My hand stopped halfway to the cabinet. There was no reason anymore. I carried 1 plate to the dining table, and sat in the same chair I had occupied for nearly 40 years. Across from me sat Margaret's empty place. Some evenings I could almost hear her telling me not to overthink everything. Other evenings I wondered what she would have said if she had lived long enough to see what our family had become. My phone buzzed. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Emily. Instead, it was a notification from the bank. Daniel's construction company had attempted to draw another $25,000 from the line of credit I had guaranteed. The request was pending my approval. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not one phone call. Not one apology. Not one conversation after cutting me out of their lives. Yet somehow, they still expected my signature. I set the phone face down without responding. 20 minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, it was Daniel. Not a call. An email. The subject line read, "Need this approved ASAP." That was all. No dad. No how are you. No mention of Emily's message. Just 3 short paragraphs explaining that a supplier needed payment before Friday and that delaying the approval could create unnecessary complications. At the bottom he had typed, "Please handle this today. Please." Not because he wanted me in his life. Because he wanted my credit. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For years I had mistaken dependence for love. Every financial rescue had convinced me I was still needed. Arthur had been right. I hadn't been preserving my family. I'd been financing the illusion that we still had one. That realization hurt more than Emily's message ever could. Because messages can be deleted. The truth stays. I looked once more at Daniel's email. Then I remembered something Margaret told me during her final week in the hospital. She had taken my hand, looked at me with surprising strength, and whispered, "Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life trying to buy people who should love you for free." At the time, I thought the medication was making her ramble. Now I realized she had seen everything long before I had. I opened my laptop. Not to approve the request. To read every document Arthur had sent me that afternoon. And with every page I finished, one uncomfortable truth became impossible to ignore. My children had spent years preparing to live without me. They had never prepared to live without what I provided. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another memory surfaced. Daniel at 8 years old, proudly carrying home a spelling trophy. Emily crying after her first heartbreak, because she believed no one would ever love her again. Margaret smiling from the front porch while all 4 of us planted flowers one Mother's Day. Those memories refused to match the people my children had become. Just before sunrise, I walked into the garage. Against the back wall sat an old cedar chest. Margaret insisted on keeping everything sentimental. School drawings, report cards, handmade birthday cards, Father's Day crafts covered in crooked handwriting. I hadn't opened that chest since the funeral. Inside, nothing had changed. Emily's 2nd grade drawing of our family stood on top. She had drawn me twice as tall as everyone else. When I asked her why, she answered without hesitation. "'Cause Daddy makes everything feel safe." A few folders underneath was Daniel's 5th grade essay. My hero. I unfolded the yellowed paper carefully. My dad fixes machines all day, but when he comes home, he still has time to fix my bike. He says people should always keep their promises. When I grow up, I want to be just like him. I had forgotten those words. Apparently he had too. A knock at the front door pulled me back to the present. I checked the clock. 8:15. Too early for neighbors. Too late for deliveries. When I opened the door, my grandson Ethan stood on the porch. He was 14 now, nearly as tall as I was. Behind him sat his mother Suv. Emily remained in the driver's seat, engine running. She didn't wave. She didn't get out. Ethan offered an awkward smile. "Hi, Grandpa." Those 2 words almost broke me. I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated before shaking his head. Mom said I can't stay. Of course she had. He shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other. I just wanted to give you this. He handed me a birthday card. My birthday had been 5 days earlier. The envelope was slightly bent. I made it at school, he said quietly. I know it's late. I opened it carefully. Inside, in handwriting that looked remarkably like Emily's at the same age, were 6 simple words. I love you. Happy birthday, Grandpa. Nothing expensive. Nothing elaborate. Just honesty. I looked toward the driveway. Emily was staring straight ahead, avoiding the house entirely. Ethan, I asked gently, does your mom know what's in this card? He looked down at his shoes. I don't think she read it. There was another long silence. Then he whispered something so softly I almost missed it. I miss coming here. Before I could answer, Emily honked the horn. Once. Sharp. Impatient. Ethan flinched. I have to go. He turned toward the driveway, then stopped. Without looking back, he said, Grandpa, I don't think Mom's angry. He swallowed hard. I think she's scared. He climbed into the SUV. Seconds later, they were gone. I stood alone on the porch, holding a handmade birthday card that had somehow accomplished what weeks of silence had not. It reminded me that children aren't born, believing love has conditions. Someone teaches them that. And for the first time, I found myself wondering whether the story I had been told about my own children was still missing a chapter I hadn't yet uncovered. Ethan's words stayed with me long after the sound of Emily's SUV disappeared down the street. I don't think Mom's angry. I think she's scared. Scared of what? That question followed me all weekend. Emily had never been afraid to disagree with me. Even as a teenager, she argued every rule I made with the confidence of a lawyer twice her age. Fear wasn't an emotion I associated with my daughter. Unless someone had convinced her she had something to lose. Monday morning, I returned to Arthur's office, carrying Ethan's birthday card in my jacket pocket. Arthur noticed it the moment I sat down. You look different, he said. I feel different. Better? No. I shook my head. Clearer. He smiled faintly. Sometimes that's the same thing. I told him about Ethan's visit. About the card. About Emily waiting in the driveway, instead of coming to the door. Most of all, I told him those final 6 words. I think she's scared. Arthur leaned back in his chair. Children don't usually cut off loving parents overnight. I know. Someone often benefits from the distance. That sentence settled heavily between us. I thought about Emily's husband, Ryan. Charming. Confident. Always full of ideas. Always one investment away from success. When Margaret was alive, she quietly questioned every business venture he started. He called them opportunities. She called them expensive hobbies. In 12 years of marriage, Ryan had started a landscaping company, an online furniture business, a food truck, a home renovation partnership, and a cryptocurrency consulting firm. Every one of them failed. Every failure somehow became someone else's fault. Usually the economy. Sometimes dishonest partners. Occasionally bad timing. Never Ryan. Arthur interrupted my thoughts. Thomas, let me ask you something. Go ahead. When was the last time Emily visited you without Ryan knowing about it? I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. I genuinely couldn't remember. Not in the last 5 years. Maybe longer. Arthur nodded slowly. I've seen situations like this before. What are you saying? I'm saying isolation rarely begins with parents. I frowned. He continued carefully. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm simply suggesting you ask yourself whether your daughter has been making these decisions independently. I stared out his office window. Images began connecting in ways they never had before. Ryan answering Emily's phone whenever I called. Ryan insisting on handling every financial discussion. Ryan laughing whenever Margaret questioned another risky investment. Ryan joking that parents should know when to let go. At the time, I dismissed it. Margaret never did. She once told me, "That man doesn't want a family, Thomas. He wants fewer people Emily listens to." I had defended him. I told Margaret she was worrying too much. Now I wasn't so sure. Arthur slid another document across the desk. "This has nothing to do with Ryan," he said. "It's simply paperwork you asked me to prepare." I looked down. They were revised estate documents. Everything was legal. Everything was straightforward. Nothing had been signed yet. Arthur rested his hands on the folder. I don't want you making permanent decisions while your emotions are still raw. I appreciated that. Most people assumed lawyers encouraged conflict. Arthur preferred clarity. If you decide to change your will, he said, I want it to be because you've thought carefully, not because you're trying to punish someone. I looked at the unsigned pages. Then I thought about Ethan standing on my porch. About Margaret's warning. About Emily sitting in her car, instead of walking 10 steps to hug her own father. Something much bigger than money was happening inside my family. I just didn't know who was pulling the strings. But I intended to find out before I signed anything that could never be undone. I left Arthur's office without signing a single document. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was observing. There is a difference. When you're desperate to keep your family together, you explain away every disappointment. Every missed call has a reason. Every broken promise has an excuse. Every uncomfortable feeling gets buried beneath the hope that next week will be different. But once that hope begins to fade, patterns become impossible to ignore. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the small cafe where Margaret and I used to meet after work. The owner, Linda, recognized me immediately. Thomas, she said with a warm smile, it's good to see you again. It's been too long. She poured my coffee before I even ordered it. Margaret used to joke that Linda knew our routine better than we did. I sat by the window, watching people hurry past in both directions. Young parents pushing strollers. College students laughing. An older couple holding hands without saying a word. I found myself wondering how many of them realized that ordinary moments become priceless only after they're gone. My phone vibrated. Daniel. For several seconds, I simply stared at his name. Then I answered. Dad. It was the first time he had called me that in weeks. Hello, Daniel. I've been trying to reach you. I almost laughed. No, you haven't. You sent one email. He ignored the comment. About the credit line. I really need that approved today. Not how have you been? Not I'm sorry. Straight to business. I received your email. So, can you authorize it? I looked out the cafe window. A father was helping his little daughter tie her shoelaces on the sidewalk. She hugged him when he finished. It happened so naturally that neither of them seemed to notice. I have a question first, I said. There was silence on the other end. What? When was the last time you called just to talk to me? Another pause. Dad, I'm kinda busy. So am I. This isn't really the time. I think it is. His voice became impatient. Can we please deal with this later? The supplier needs an answer. I took a slow sip of coffee. No. What do you mean, no? I mean no. The word felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because I had never said it, because I had almost never said it to my children. You promised you'd always support me, Daniel said. I closed my eyes. No, Daniel. I promised I'd always love you. That's not the same thing. His breathing grew heavier. So you're just abandoning me now? The irony almost took my breath away. You stopped speaking to me weeks ago. That's different. Why? It just is. I waited. He didn't explain. Because he couldn't. Finally, I spoke as calmly as I could. If your relationship with me depends on whether I approve another loan, then we don't have a relationship. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. I can't believe you're doing this. No, I replied quietly. Neither can I. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for several seconds before setting it on the table. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even relieved. I was grieving. Not because I had refused another financial request. Because I had finally accepted that my son believed love and obligation were the same thing. As I sat there, Linda walked over carrying a slice of Margaret's favorite lemon cake. I didn't order this, I said. She smiled gently. I know. She placed it in front of me anyway. Your wife always said that when life became too heavy, you should eat dessert first. I couldn't help smiling. Margaret had always found simple ways to remind me that kindness didn't have to be earned. Driving home that evening, I realized something had quietly changed inside me. For years, I'd been afraid that saying no would cost me my children. Now I understood the painful truth. I had spent years saying yes, and I had been losing them anyway. The morning after my conversation with Daniel, I woke to 3 missed calls. All from Emily. For a brief moment, hope got the better of me. Maybe Ethan's visit had changed something. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe we were finally going to have the conversation I'd been waiting 2 years to have. I called her back immediately. She answered on the first ring. Dad. Just hearing that word again made my chest tighten. Emily. There was a long silence between us. Then she cleared her throat. I heard you refused to help Daniel. So that was why she had called. I told him I wasn't approving another loan. You know he's under a lot of pressure. I know he's been under pressure for almost 10 years. She sighed heavily. Can't we just get through this one last problem? I looked around my quiet living room. How many times had I heard those exact words? One last problem. One last loan. One last favor. One last emergency. Every last time had simply become the beginning of the next request. I've heard that before. This time is different. It always is. She didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject. Ryan thinks you're making emotional decisions. There it was again. Ryan. Not Emily. Not her own opinion. Ryan's. What do you think? I asked. Another silence. I asked what you think, Emily. I don't know. Her voice sounded uncertain. Smaller than I remembered. When was the last time you made a decision without asking Ryan first? She became defensive almost instantly. That's not fair. I didn't say it was. He's my husband. I know. We make decisions together. I understand. I paused before asking the question that had been haunting me since Arthur's office. Did you write that message telling me never to call again? She didn't speak. Emily? I sent it. That wasn't my question. More silence. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Ryan helped me. Those 3 words explained more than an hour of arguments ever could. I closed my eyes. Not because I was angry. Because I suddenly remembered something Margaret had once told me after a family barbecue years earlier. She had watched Ryan answer every question directed at Emily. She had noticed how he interrupted her halfway through stories. How he laughed whenever she disagreed with him. That evening, Margaret quietly said, One day Emily won't even realize she's asking permission to have her own thoughts. I had dismissed it as a mother's unnecessary worry. Now I wished I had listened. Dad, Emily said softly, are you still there? Yes. I never wanted things to get this bad. Then why did they? She struggled to answer. I don't know anymore. For the first time in years, I believed she was telling me the truth. She genuinely didn't know. Somewhere along the way, our relationship had become buried beneath expectations, financial dependence, and someone else's influence. I miss you, I said. The words escaped before I could stop them. On the other end of the line, I heard quiet crying. Not loud sobs. Just the sound of someone trying very hard not to let herself be heard. Then another voice appeared in the background. Emily? Ryan. Instantly, everything changed. I have to go, she said quickly. We'll talk later. Will we? I don't know. The call ended. I sat staring at my phone for several minutes. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it wasn't the conversation I'd expected either. For the first time, I didn't see my daughter as the villain in our story. I saw someone who seemed trapped between the family she came from and the life she had built. The question was no longer whether she loved me. The question was whether she still remembered how to choose for herself. And deep down, I had the unsettling feeling that answering that question would uncover a truth far more painful than anything hidden inside my will. The call with Emily should have given me hope. Instead, it left me with questions I couldn't shake. For years, I had blamed my children for everything that had gone wrong. Now I was beginning to wonder how much of the damage had been caused by silence instead of cruelty. Silence has a way of growing roots. Leave it alone long enough, and it becomes impossible to tell where the truth ends and the lies begin. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. Mr. Hale? Yes. My name is Melissa. I'm Daniel's office manager. I recognized her voice immediately. She had worked for him for nearly 6 years. I'm sorry to bother you, she said nervously, but I thought you should know something. My stomach tightened. What happened? There isn't really a supplier waiting for payment. I frowned. What do you mean? The loan wasn't for building materials. She hesitated. I probably shouldn't be telling you this. Melissa. She lowered her voice. Mr. Collins has been here almost every day. Ryan. Key and Daniel have been working on another investment. What kind of investment? I don't know all the details, but I heard them talking about vacation properties. They were expecting your guarantee to secure additional financing. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. So the money wasn't to save the business. No, sir. She sounded genuinely apologetic. I thought you already knew. After we ended the call, I sat motionless in my living room. Not because of the money, because of the partnership. Daniel and Ryan. Suddenly, everything began fitting together. Ryan benefited if Daniel had access to my credit. Daniel benefited if Ryan convinced Emily to keep asking for financial help. Each of them reinforced the other's expectations, and I had unknowingly become the foundation supporting both of them. That afternoon, I drove past Daniel's office. I had no intention of going inside. I simply wanted to see the place with fresh eyes. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only 4 vehicles remained. One of them belonged to Ryan. As I watched from across the street, the 2 of them walked outside carrying rolled-up architectural drawings. They were laughing. Not the strained laughter of men under crushing financial pressure. The relaxed laughter of people making plans. Ryan slapped Daniel on the shoulder before pointing toward a luxury SUV parked nearby. Daniel nodded enthusiastically. Neither of them looked like men worried about keeping a struggling company alive. For years, I had accepted every emergency at face value. Now I wondered how many of those emergencies had actually been opportunities they expected me to finance. I didn't confront them. There was no point. People rarely confess to lies they still believe are working. Instead, I drove home and called Arthur. I think you were right, I said after he answered. What changed? I finally stopped listening to what they were saying and started watching what they were doing? Exactly. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Actions rarely need interpretation, Thomas. That evening, I opened the cedar chest again. This time I wasn't searching for memories. I was searching for perspective. Near the bottom, beneath old photo albums, I found a small envelope addressed in Margaret's handwriting. It simply read, "For Thomas. If you ever begin doubting yourself." My heart began pounding. I had never seen it before. The envelope had been hidden beneath years of forgotten keepsakes, waiting patiently for a day neither of us could have imagined. I sat at the kitchen table with trembling hands. Whatever Margaret had written, she had intended me to read it only when I needed it most. And somehow, I knew that the words inside were about to change everything I believed about the family we had spent a lifetime trying to protect. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. Margaret had always been thoughtful, but this felt different. It felt intentional. Almost as if she had known there would come a day when I would question every decision I had ever made. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. Her handwriting was as elegant as I remembered. Steady, patient, comforting. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest Thomas. If you're reading this, it means something has happened that has made you doubt yourself. I wish I were there to remind you of what I'm about to say, but life doesn't always give us that choice. You have always loved our family with your whole heart. Sometimes I worried you loved them so completely that you forgot to leave a little kindness for yourself. Please don't mistake sacrifice for love. They are not the same thing. Real love grows stronger when it is shared. Sacrifice without limits only teaches people to expect more. If our children ever stop seeing you as their father and begin seeing you only as the answer to their problems, promise me you won't blame yourself. We raised them with love. What they choose to do with that love belongs to them, not to you. And if the day ever comes when you must choose between protecting your peace and protecting their expectations, choose your peace. Because I know your heart. If you don't, no one else ever will. I love you. Always. Margaret. By the time I reached the final line, I could barely see the page through my tears. For 3 years after her death, I had wondered what advice she would give me if she were still sitting across the kitchen table. Now I had my answer. She wasn't asking me to fight my children. She wasn't asking me to punish them. She was asking me to stop abandoning myself. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. Then I noticed something else. Tucked behind the letter was a second piece of paper. It wasn't handwritten. It was a photocopy of a bank statement. Across the top, Margaret had written one sentence in blue ink. "Please ask Arthur about this." Confused, I studied the document. The transaction was dated 18 months before Margaret passed away. A transfer. $100,000. The recipient's name had been partially blacked out for privacy, but one detail remained visible. The authorization signature. Ryan Collins. My heartbeat quickened. Why would Margaret save this? Why would she tell me to ask Arthur? I grabbed my phone immediately. It was nearly 7 in the evening. Too late to call. I spent the entire night trying to make sense of what I had seen. Ryan's signature. Margaret's note. Arthur's name. None of it fit together. The next morning, I was waiting outside Arthur's office before he unlocked the front door. He looked surprised to see me. "You must have found something." Without saying a word, I handed him the envelope. He read Margaret's letter first. Then he looked at the photocopied bank statement. His expression changed instantly. He closed his office door before speaking. "I hoped you would never need to find this." "You know what it is?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." "What does it mean?" Arthur took a long breath. "It means Margaret discovered something about Ryan before she died." He looked directly into my eyes. "And she asked me to keep the evidence safe until she believed you were finally ready to hear the truth." In that moment, every unanswered question from the past several years seemed to gather into one terrifying possibility. Margaret hadn't simply worried about Ryan. She had uncovered something. Something serious enough to leave behind evidence. Something important enough to entrust to Arthur instead of telling our children. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the battle ahead wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about a secret my wife had taken to her grave. Arthur didn't speak again until the blinds were closed. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. He wanted to make sure no one interrupted what he was about to tell me. "I need you to understand something first," he said. "Margaret never wanted to destroy your family. I know." Everything she did was to protect it. He unlocked a filing cabinet and removed a thin manila folder. Compared to the thick estate files surrounding it, the folder looked insignificant. Yet the way he carried it made it feel heavier than anything I had seen that week. He placed it between us. About 2 years before Margaret became seriously ill, she asked me to review several financial documents. "What kind of documents?" "Loan guarantees, property records, bank transfers." My mind immediately went to Ryan. "She thought something was wrong?" Arthur nodded. "She noticed money leaving your accounts more often than you realized." I frowned. "I approved those transfers." "Most of them, yes." He opened the folder. "Some of them you never knew about." A chill ran through me. "What are you saying?" "Margaret discovered that Ryan had persuaded Emily to obtain your signatures on several financial authorizations by telling her they were routine family documents." I stared at him. "I would never sign something without reading it." "You normally wouldn't." Arthur looked at me sympathetically. "But remember the months after your heart surgery?" I did. "The medication. The exhaustion. The endless paperwork that seemed to appear every other day. Margaret had handled most of it because I could barely stay awake for more than a few hours at a time." Arthur slid photocopies across the desk. There were my signatures. Undeniably mine. Yet the documents attached to them weren't the ones I remembered signing. "They switched pages?" I whispered. "They added authorizations behind legitimate paperwork." I felt sick. "I never noticed." "Margaret did." He pointed to several highlighted sections. "They weren't stealing from you directly." "Then what were they doing?" "They were increasing Ryan's access to financing by using your financial standing." I leaned back, trying to process it. "So every time I believed I was simply helping family, you were assuming far more financial risk than you understood." I buried my face in my hands. Margaret had carried this burden alone. She had uncovered the truth while also fighting the illness that would eventually take her life. "Why didn't she tell me?" Arthur answered gently. "She tried." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "She wanted proof before accusing anyone." He paused. "Then she got her diagnosis." I closed my eyes. I remembered those months. Hospital visits, specialists, treatments, fear. Everything else had faded into the background. She asked me to begin separating your finances from any future obligations connected to Ryan, Arthur continued. We managed to limit the exposure, but she believed confronting Emily without undeniable evidence might push her further away. That sounded exactly like Margaret. Always trying to save everyone, even the people hurting her. Arthur closed the folder. There's one piece of good news. I almost laughed. I'm listening. Most of the risky authorizations have already expired. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But there was always a but. One significant matter remains unresolved. He handed me another document. I recognized the address immediately. My home. The house Margaret and I had spent 40 years paying for. The house where we raised our children. The house where every Christmas, birthday, and anniversary lived inside the walls. My eyes stopped at one sentence near the bottom of the page. Pending approval upon transfer of estate assets. I looked at Arthur. What exactly does that mean? His expression was calm, but unmistakably serious. It means someone has been making plans for this house. Who? He met my eyes without hesitation. And based on everything Margaret left behind, I believe your children think those plans are already guaranteed. I read the document 3 times before the words finally settled into place. Someone had already been planning what to do with my home. Not after asking me. Not after discussing my future. After assuming it. The realization hurt in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't about the value of the house. It was about what the house represented. Margaret and I had spent 40 years turning those walls into a home. We painted every room together. We planted every tree in the yard. We measured the children's heights on the kitchen doorway until they were old enough to laugh at the tradition. Every corner held a memory. Yet somewhere along the way, those memories had become nothing more than future equity in someone else's eyes. Arthur folded his hands. I don't want you making any decisions today. I've heard you say that before. And I'll keep saying it until you're certain. He was right. This wasn't the time for anger. It was the time for clarity. Over the next week, I stayed away from my phone. No calls. No emails. No discussions about money. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret died. I started living in my own life again. I visited the community garden where she used to volunteer every Thursday morning. I repaired the old wooden bench she'd always wanted me to fix. I met an old friend for breakfast without checking my phone every 5 minutes, expecting another request for money. Slowly, almost without noticing it, the constant pressure inside my chest began to disappear. One afternoon, while trimming the rose bushes Margaret loved so much, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Emily. This time, she came alone. She stepped out slowly, looking around the yard as though she hadn't truly seen it in years. When she reached the porch, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "The roses are blooming. They always bloom in July. They were Mom's favorite." Yes. Her eyes filled with tears. "So were you." She covered her face for a moment before lowering her hands again. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet. Fragile. Not rehearsed. "I've wanted to come here so many times." "What stopped you?" She looked toward the street. "I kept telling myself I'd come next week. And then? There was always another reason not to." I nodded. "I know." She took a deep breath. "Dad, Ryan knows about the will." I felt my stomach tighten. "How?" "I told him years ago." "Everything?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "Just that you and Mom had planned to divide everything equally." I remained silent. "He keeps saying we need to make sure nothing changes." There it was. Spoken aloud. Not grief. Not reconciliation. Fear. Exactly as Ethan had said. Emily looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the little girl who used to run into my arms after every thunderstorm. I don't think I understood what was happening. "What do you understand now?" She began crying. "That somewhere along the way I stopped protecting my relationship with you." I stepped forward. For the first time in years, I hugged my daughter. She held on tightly, crying into my shoulder like she had when she was 10 years old. I didn't ask about the money. I didn't ask about Ryan. There would be time for those conversations later. Some wounds need understanding before accountability. As she pulled away, she reached into her handbag and handed me a folded envelope. I found this hidden in Ryan's desk. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I haven't opened it. Why not? 'Cause I thought. She swallowed hard. I thought Mom would have wanted you to see it first. I stared at the envelope. Across the front, in Ryan's handwriting, were 5 words that sent a chill through my entire body. After Thomas signs everything. For the first time, I wasn't dealing with assumptions or misunderstandings. I was holding evidence. And whatever waited inside that envelope would determine whether my family still had a chance to heal, or whether Margaret's final warning had come far too late. Emily and I carried the envelope into the kitchen. Neither of us sat down immediately. For several seconds we simply stared at it on the table. That small piece of paper seemed to contain every fear Margaret had tried to protect us from. Finally, I opened it. Inside were copies of property valuations, loan estimates, and a draft agreement between Ryan and Daniel. The first page described a plan to sell my house after my death and use the proceeds to purchase 3 vacation properties. One for Ryan and Emily. One for Daniel. The third would be rented to cover the loans on the other 2. They had calculated everything. The estimated sale price. The remaining mortgage. The expected inheritance taxes. Even the cost of clearing out my belongings. One handwritten note beside that figure. Read. Use an estate company. Faster than sorting everything ourselves. I felt something inside me go completely still. My entire life with Margaret had been reduced to a cleanup expense. Emily lowered herself into a chair. I didn't know about this. Her voice trembled. I swear to you, Dad. I believed her. Not because I wanted to. Because the horror on her face was too real to imitate. Then we reached the final page. It was a timetable. Ryan had written down the steps required to make the plan work. Convince Thomas not to revise the will. Keep Daniel financially dependent. Push for power of attorney if Thomas's health declines. Arrange a property transfer before probate. Beside one line, he had written, Emily can handle him emotionally. She read it twice. Then she stood and rushed to the sink. I heard her crying before she turned on the water to hide it. For years, Ryan had convinced her that I was controlling. Yet, behind her back, he had reduced her to a tool for controlling me. I wanted to tell her none of it was her fault. But that wouldn't have been true. Ryan had manipulated her. Daniel had lied to me. And I had spent years ignoring every warning because facing the truth felt more painful than financing the lie. We had all played a part. The difference was what we chose to do after learning the truth. Emily returned to the table and wiped her eyes. What happens now? I placed the documents back inside the envelope. Now we call Arthur. She looked frightened. Are you going to the police? I don't know yet. Are you cutting me out of the will? There it was. The question she hated herself for asking. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily, this stopped being about the will the moment you walked through that door alone. She began crying again. But there will be consequences. She nodded. I understand. That afternoon, Arthur reviewed every page. By sunset, he had contacted the bank, frozen all pending guarantees, revoked every old authorization, and prepared notices preventing anyone from using my name or property as collateral. Then he placed the revised estate documents in front of me. This time, I didn't hesitate. I signed every page. Not to punish my children. To make certain that no one would ever again confuse my love with permission. And when Ryan and Daniel discovered what I had done, they arrived at my house together. Not to apologize. To demand answers. I saw their cars pull into the driveway from the living room window. Ryan climbed out first. Daniel followed a few seconds later. Neither of them looked confused. They looked angry. Arthur had anticipated this. Before leaving earlier that afternoon, he reminded me of one simple rule. Don't argue with people who have already decided you're the problem. State the facts once, then let them choose how to respond. I opened the front door before either of them could knock. Ryan forced a smile. Thomas, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There has, I replied. Just not the one you think. Daniel stepped forward. Dad, Arthur called the bank. They froze everything. Yes. You've ruined months of planning. The words escaped his mouth before he realized what he had admitted. Ryan shot him a sharp look, but it was too late. Months of planning? I asked quietly. Daniel's face lost its color. Ryan quickly stepped in. He didn't mean it like that. I know exactly what he meant. I walked back inside and left the front door open. If you're coming in, come in. If you're here to shout, you can do it from the driveway. They followed me into the kitchen. The envelope Margaret had unknowingly left behind sat on the table beside the revised estate documents. Ryan's eyes landed on it immediately. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely nervous. Where did you get that? Emily. His shoulders dropped ever so slightly. So she found it. Daniel turned toward Ryan. What envelope? Ryan didn't answer. I slid the papers across the table. Read them. The room became completely silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. You wrote this? Ryan remained silent. You planned all this? Still nothing. Finally, Ryan placed the papers down. I was trying to secure everyone's future. By planning my funeral before I was dead, I asked. You weren't supposed to see those notes. No, I said. I wasn't. Daniel stared at Ryan. You told me we were protecting the family. We were. No, Daniel replied, his voice shaking. You were protecting yourself. Ryan looked toward me. Thomas, you have to understand how expensive life has become. I understand that perfectly. You have more than enough. And that made it yours? He had no answer. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Then Emily walked into the house. She had her own key. She looked at Ryan, then at Daniel, before finally meeting my eyes. I told him everything. Ryan took one step toward her. You had no right. She stood straighter than I had seen in years. I had every right. You've destroyed everything. She slowly shook her head. No. I finally stopped helping you destroy it. Ryan looked around the room, searching for someone to support him. No one did. He grabbed his jacket. You'll all regret this. Arthur's words echoed in my mind. State the facts once. I looked directly at Ryan. You are no longer authorized to use my name, my credit, my property, or my finances in any capacity. I paused. And if you attempt to do so again, my attorney already has instructions to protect me. Ryan realized there was nothing left to say. Without another word, he walked out. The front door closed behind him. Daniel remained standing in the middle of the kitchen. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. I don't know how this happened, he whispered. I believed him. Not because he was innocent, but because people rarely notice the exact moment convenience becomes entitlement. It happened slowly. One compromise. One excuse. One borrowed dollar. One avoided conversation. Until eventually, you wake up unable to recognize yourself. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to begin telling the truth. I hope you mean that. I do. The road back won't be easy. I know. And it won't start with money. He nodded. It'll start with earning your trust. For the first time in a long time, I saw my son instead of the man who kept asking for another loan. Months later, the house felt alive again. Not because everything had been magically repaired. It hadn't. Healing isn't a single conversation. It's 1,000 honest choices. Emily visited every Sunday with Ethan. Daniel came by on Saturday mornings to help me maintain the garden Margaret loved. We talked more than we worked. Sometimes the conversations were uncomfortable. Those were usually the most important ones. I never restored the old guarantees. I never became the family's emergency bank again. Instead, I became something far more valuable. Their father. As for my estate, I did change it. Part of it now funds scholarships at the local trade school Margaret admired so much. Another portion supports the community garden where she spent her happiest retirement mornings. The rest remains for my children and grandchildren. Not as a reward for expectation, but as a gift to those who finally remembered that love is never measured by what someone leaves behind. It's measured by how you treat them while they're still here. Looking back, calling my lawyer didn't destroy my family. It revealed the truth that had been hiding inside it. Truth is painful. Sometimes it costs relationships, but lies always cost more. And if there's one lesson these last few years have taught me, It's this. The greatest inheritance you can leave your children isn't your house, your savings, or your name. It's the example that love without respect becomes obligation, while love with healthy boundaries becomes something that can survive for generations. The day my children cut me off, I thought I had lost my family. In the end, I simply stopped losing myself. And that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? Or what would you have done if you were in Thomas's place? Leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I read as many of your comments as I can. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and I'll see you in the next story.